Hey family, so today we're looking at painting Kassey from Zombicide, Undead or Alive core box Survivors. I've had a few questions about applying Zenithal undercoat using an airbrush, so I thought I'd include that in my process in this video today. As you can see, I'm using Citadel Mournfang brown base paint for my Zenithal undercoat base layer. I'd recommend, if you're using a base paint, approximately mix a ratio 2:1 mix of paint to water. Should achieve the viscosity something around skimmed milk. Also recommend using distilled water, not tap water, not for an airbrush. There's a risk of particles and minerals, etc. cause damage. So once this is ready, this initial undercoat then is applied from the bottom, trying to achieve an even and good level of coverage for our main paint to sit on. You'll note that the very top of the miniature is often being left unpainted. This is okay. These areas will get caught through secondary and tertiary stages of the Zenithal undercoat process. I'm now going in with the Citadel Air Kislev Flesh for my next layer. This will form the main undercoat for the miniature. This is applied more from a top to side application, approximately 60 degrees from the top. This ensures the Mournfang brown remains visible in the shadows and the undercarriage. And then finally applying Citadel Air White Scar. This is angled much more from a top down, with occasional angling to around 15 degrees, using personal judgment. The purpose here is to capture those parts of the miniature that would normally naturally catch more of the light. With our Zenithal undercoat complete, we can now proceed to applying our contrast paints. I begin with the skin, using an approximate 1:1 mix of water and Guilliman flesh contrast paint. I really like how easy this goes on, and will often apply a watered mix ahead of a straight from the pot application. In general, for all use of contrast paints, you could always apply a further coat if you want to add further depth and darkness. But as you can see here, it goes on really well and nicely with the skin and the flesh. I'm always really happy with how that turns out. And with Kassey, there's quite a bit on there, so just going through, there's the hands and the bare feet running around amongst all the zombie guts. And trying to emphasise there straight from the pot to make that a bit darker on those deeper, darker areas where the shadows will be more, under the ankles, between the toes. Next up, I use Major's Purple Contrast for Kassey's Blouse. Again, this is initially mixed, it's a 1:1 ratio of water in the first instance, using the wet palette. This helps give that lighter initial application. And as you'll then see, I'll go over certain areas that I want to apply further darkening. And eventually start reaching out directly from the pot to get those real darker areas that I want to achieve. But otherwise, the main part, certainly for the upper regions, I'm using that mix. And then as I apply for that, but I want the full richness of the contrast paint to come through, and therefore applied straight from the pot. Those final instances there. Try and tidy up as you go. And of course on the hair. So on to Militarian green contrast as the next base coat. This is applied liberally to her trousers. You'll note on my initial coat, again it's very translucent, but I stick with the 1:1 watered down mix, and as you can see, it comes out nicely, so I just apply more and more layers until I'm happy with the result that I'm getting. Try and build it up in the areas where I want that greater level of shading, darkness. And as you can see, once it's dried, it comes out quite a bit darker than you first anticipate. So do be aware of that with some of these colours. Now I'm going to go in with some Terradon Turquoise contrast. These are for her trouser patches and also her braces. Personally, I really love the striking hue of this colour. As you can see, even using a 1-to-1 watered down mix, this still comes out very vibrant. Just taking a lot of care and just try and pick out those details, those areas. So going in with some Snakebite leather contrast paint next. And this is used for Kassey's Dynamite Satchel. As I mentioned before, I really love the effect of this paint. I never feel left wanting once it's applied and it dries. I think it does a great job at capturing a good level of mid-tones with its chemical makeup as it sits and separates that process. Also going over that rope. Shoulder piece there. And the hilt of the blade. I use a Gore-Grunta fur contrast to paint up Kassey's hair. I find that this is a really satisfying colour, gives a much richer hue than something like Snakebite leather, and it's great for lighter brown, reddish hair, I find. Does a really nice job of picking up the depth, the detail that's been provided by the manufacturer of that miniature. As you'd assume in my other tutorials, I use Briar Queen Chill contrast to apply to those areas that I intend to be metallic silver. The idea here is that the cold hue helps to emphasise the coldness of these metal tones once you apply that silver or steel or whichever is your preference. It just helps to bring that through. Next up, I use Baal Red contrast paint. It's amazingly vibrant colour. It really helps to make those sticks of dynamite really pop on this miniature. So going in there on the one in the hand, and then of course you've got a bag laden with lots of juicy dynamite. And I go in with Blood Angel's red contrast to apply a slightly deeper hue of red to the buckler of Kassey's Sabre. So in contrast to the cold blue silver tones, this red hue will help the applied gold layer over the top feel much warmer and richer. Once I finish with the buckler, so use that Blood Angel's red to go in and apply a few flecks to the stick of dynamite, just adding a bit of shading in there. As before, I'm going to use Agrax Earthshade to carefully go over the areas that I feel need that bit more depth. And I also find it helps to differentiate between the various areas of the miniature, giving a much more stark contrast to each different palette and colour represented. It does take a bit of time, a bit of care, but it's absolutely worth doing. It just really adds that greater level of depth. It's also a great shade to use and apply a bit more depth, particularly on skin tone areas, carefully picking out between the fingers and the toes, for example. So you can see, trying to tell it to keep these areas for the undertones, where there's the greater level of shadow, just adding that greater depth. Could of course go in there with Nuln oil, but I find that can be a bit darker, as with this is a bit more little forgiving. There, going over the face, as mentioned, good for skin tones. Now this is where this mini unfortunately goes a little Pete Tong, and I confess I'm still working to get better at faces. However, this mini's face in particular really didn't help. Throughout most of this video, it's looked like she's had her tongue sticking out, and other than her eyes, there's been very little genuine distinction in that face, especially with her nose and mouth. However, nearing the final stages now, I use a base Vallejo Gold to bring out the buckler of her Sabre, and you'll hopefully see that red base layer really pays off just to add to that warmth. And I use some Vallejo Dark Flesh to apply some highlights, a healthy colour to Kassey's skin. Started with her feet and working up, so her arms, and finally that face. Got to cover up some of that white with something, eh? So yes, definitely got some work to do on that face. Let's get in there. Try and bring out that nose, those cheekbones, that chin. A little bit on the ear. Next I apply the silver. So this goes onto the Sabre, the blade of the knife about her waist. That's where we previously used the Chill Contrast Paint. And now going a little bit more Agrax Earthshade to the face in particular. Still working to bring down the shocking white I applied earlier. Finally, I use a little bit of Volupus pink contrast to apply to her lips. Again, using the wet palette there, just bringing down the starkness, further helping detract from the white, and tied it up a little bit more with some of that dark flesh that's still wet on my palette afterwards. And that's it. Kassey is ready to face down some zombies, working with the other survivors to save her town. I hope you've enjoyed this guide and gotten some ideas, and inspiration, and hopefully some encouragement. I'm sure you'll hopefully see why I love contrast paints so much, and just how these have revolutionised the miniature painting hobby. So from the family meeple, thanks for watching, and hopefully see you again soon.